All right. Ooh. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to We Are Listening. Thank you very much for joining us, whether you are watching on Zoom or whether you are watching on Facebook. My name is Ahmed Dents, Development Coordinator here at San Diego Repertory Theatre. Before we get started tonight, a couple of things, couple of quick announcements as we get the conversation going here. I want to make sure as you are joining the Zoom call that you have your camera turned off and your microphone muted. You only want to see those who will be participating in the call. So at this moment right now, please make sure that you're stopping video on your Zoom channel, and please make sure that your microphone is muted. And just for good measure, I'm gonna say it one more time. Make sure that you have stopped the video on your camera in Zoom, and make sure that your microphone is muted. Again, this is We Are Listening. It's our bi-weekly conversation on Zoom and Facebook Live, produced by San Diego Repertory Theatre in partnership with the La Jolla Playhouse and the Old Globe. This is our, in layman's terms, this is just our online talk. We look at life in theater through the perspective of Black theater professionals, African-American theater professionals, and unique challenges, especially in this time right now of heightened racial tensions and racial awareness, where representation seems to be and actually is a key topic of discussion, and it's also a key life discussion at the moment. Again, make sure that your camera is off, make sure that your microphone is off. We have a very special guest joining us tonight. I'll introduce him in just a moment. Also, we will have a brief question and answer period when we get done with our talk tonight. That'll probably be into about 45 minutes into our talk, 45, 50 minutes. I'll be giving you cues when you can submit your questions. If you're watching on Zoom, you can submit your questions via chat. If you're watching on Facebook, you can submit your questions via the comment section. And Sharisa and the rest of the production team will be looking at those questions, giving them to me so that we can go ahead and get to as many questions and comments as we can. Again, thank you for joining us. Again, this is our bi-weekly conversation. On September 24th, I will be joined by Nikki Cooper and Mark Sharp, theater administrators on the East Coast. Nikki Cooper used to be here at La Jolla Playhouse. You can head on over to sdrep.org/listening to get links to that event. Make sure you go ahead and sign up tonight. That'll be another spectacular conversation. I do want to make a couple of announcements before we get started. Again, please make sure that your microphone and your camera is off, and we will have a brief question and answer session when we get done with our conversation. A couple of things I want to tell you about San Diego Repertory Theatre. Visit sdrep.org, get all the information about what's going on with us. And two things that I want to highlight with you. A couple of online performances that we have coming up. Number one, Hershey Felder as George Gershwin alone, live from Florence, Italy. This is on this Sunday, September 13th. Hershey will be telling the story of America's great composer, and he'll bring George Gershwin to life on the stage live from Italy. Visit sdrep.org to get your tickets and get your instructions on how to watch. And also, my man, Mr. Herbert Siguenza, is back with a weekend at Pablo Picasso, but this time it is in film form. It starts showing on September 17th through October 14th. A Weekend with Pablo Picasso is written and performed by Herbert Siguenza. It is directed by Tim Powell and Todd Salovey. If you have seen A Weekend with Pablo Picasso on stage, you're definitely going to watch it on film. Herbert has done this show on wild audiences from here to LA, the Bay Area, Houston, and Denver, and I know it's going to be absolutely spectacular to watch. And if you buy a ticket and get the link to the show, you can watch it as many times as you want between September 17th and October 14th. So again, both of those wonderful performances, Hershey Felder as George Gershwin alone, live from Florence, Italy, and The Weekend with Pablo Picasso, available now at sdrep.org. Again, my name is Ahmed Dents, Development Coordinator, and host of We Are Listening. This online salon is now a partnership with the La Jolla Playhouse and the Old Globe. We are trying to broaden out this conversation not only in San Diego, but nationally. A couple of other things I want to tell you. We are putting this in podcast form. In fact, I wrapped up some editing today. So you will be able to listen to all of these conversations. They are available now on the San Diego Repertory Theatre YouTube page, La Jolla Playhouse YouTube page. I'm pretty sure it'll be available on the Globe YouTube page soon, but they'll also be coming to any online device in podcast form. That's my fault. I'm the one lagging on that editing and getting that together, but we'll have that together by the end of the week. And if you want more information on when those are coming out, I suggest that you really sign up for these events. That way I have your email address. You can sign up at Eventbrite, which is where we are signing up for these online events. You can also send me an email at adents@sdrep.org, and I will get you signed up on the email list so you can hear all of the announcements for We Are Listening. Again, as I told you, this is a partnership now with the Old Globe and the La Jolla Playhouse, and part of that partnership is a curation team, and part of that curation team is my man who was a former guest here on We Are Listening, Mr. Freedom Bradley Ballantyne. He is the Old Globe's Associate Artistic Director and Director of Arts Engagement. He will be helping curate guests for this show. He'll also be coming on with co-hosting duties. Our other curation partner is La Jolla Playhouse Artistic Programs Manager and Local Casting Director, Jacole Kitchen. She is actually my co-host this evening. So I would like to introduce you to Jacole. Hey, what's up, Jacole? And as in Zoom fashion, you were muted.
I was muted. Hi, everybody. Hi, Ahmed. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. So excited to be have La Jolla Playhouse be a part of We Are Listening, as well as just to kick off this first conversation with the partnership. I'm so happy to be here.
So, like I said, this is a great partnership. It's a spectacular partnership, and we're looking to bring, again, we're looking to broaden out the conversation, not here just in San Diego, but to take this conversation to a national level as well. And we have a lot of great guests coming up and a lot of great guests that we're working to bring to you. And we want to thank you. If you have been watching We Are Listening, thank you for coming back. If you're new, we hope you keep coming back and spread the word. There are great conversations going on here. And tonight, we have a very, very special guest. This gentleman, many of you know who he is. This man has just a stellar career, not only in theater and performing arts, but in television as well. He has recently taken on a new post at the Ford Theater in Washington, D.C. as the Senior Artistic Director. Please welcome to We Are Listening, the one and only Sheldon Epps. How you doing, Sheldon?
Hello, good evening, everybody. How are you? The one and only. I like
the one and only.
The one and only.
Okay. Hey, first of all, thank you for joining us tonight, Sheldon. We really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk to us and talk to everybody who's joined us on conversation tonight. And we want to congratulate you on your new post at the Ford Theater. Like that's really something. I mean, this is one of the most visited venues in the nation's capital. Why don't you go ahead and give everybody just a brief words of whatever you want to say about this new position for you?
Well, sure. First of all, I want to say it's great to be with you. Many of you know that San Diego was my home base for a while, and the Old Globe was my artistic home for about 4 or 5 years. So it's nice to be back in San Diego, virtually speaking. But yes, I recently was asked to join the Ford's Theater artistic team as a senior artistic advisor. Forgive me, because of the fires, my internet is blipping in and out a little bit. So if you miss me for a few seconds, just let me know and I'll try to go back and rewind for you. But yes, I was just asked to join the Ford's Theater artistic team as senior artistic advisor. I directed there, or remounted, a production of 12 Angry Men that I'd done here at Pasadena Playhouse 3 or 4 years ago, and I remounted that at Ford's Theater a year and a half ago, and had a great relationship with everyone at the theater and with Paul Tedrow, who is their producing artistic director. And we remained in contact and conversation after that production. And he came to me and said, you know, I speak to you so often and lean on you for your artistic advice. So I think we ought to make it official and bring you on as part of the team.
That's right. That's right.
I'm grateful for that opportunity. It's a beautiful, beautiful historic theater, and certainly a theater that is important in its legacy right now, given the fact that it is there to honor Lincoln, who probably was the president more deeply involved with racial issues than any president up until right now,
Right.
until the recent years.
That's right. That's right. Well, like I always say, you know, anybody can read a bio. That's easy. But, you know, for our audience, we really like them to hear from our guests themselves about what was their, especially as we, you know, the issues we're talking about now. What was your intro into theater and performing arts? What got you into this theater and performing arts world?
Right. Well, two things, both related to the same incident in my life. I'm actually from Los Angeles. I was born here. I'm a kid from Compton, I always say. But when I was 11 or 12 years old, my father got a job in New York City. So we moved from LA to Teaneck, New Jersey, which is a suburb of New York City. And I suddenly went from a predominantly Black neighborhood, community, school to a predominantly Jewish community, in which I was frequently the only person of color in most of my classes, which was traumatic, to say the least. I think a move for anybody at that age is probably traumatic, but you know, culturally, societally, religiously, all of those things, my mind was just blown by it. And I sort of found every excuse to be sick every morning and try to get out of going to school. So my parents just said, that's enough of that. You're going to school. So two things happened as a result of that. One is that my mother was a theater goer, and she took me to see Broadway theater. And I suddenly discovered this magical thing called Broadway theater that I had not known about at all in Los Angeles. And I was just hooked on that. And very quickly after that, I would save up my allowance and jump on the bus and buy a balcony ticket for what was then $7.50 or something like that. And went to see all kind of plays and musicals, whether I knew anything about them or not. So I got first hooked on the theater as an audience member, as somebody who just loved being in the theater and watching that magic unfold. But it's interesting because the word community is so important to me in the work that we do, and I know it's important to both of you and your theaters. But I was looking for a community, you know, as this kid who was suddenly a stranger in a strange land. I was looking for a group of people that I could connect with, that I could find an embrace with. I was kind of a small kid, so I wasn't inclined towards sports or anything. And I always loved language. My father's a preacher, so I always loved the spoken word. And so I drifted toward the drama club, not because I wanted to be an actor, but because I thought I would find a community there. And I did, and it was warm, it was satisfying, it was giving, and I felt like I had something to give to that situation. But it wasn't really until I was a senior in high school that I really said, well, maybe I'll try to make a go of this and make a career of it. And once my parents got up off the floor, they actually said, okay, but only if you go to college. They were insistent on that, which I did. And I went to Carnegie Mellon as an acting student and graduated as an actor and worked as an actor for several years. But then 5 or 6 years after that, looking to find another community, I started a theater in New York City off-Broadway with several of the people that I'd been at Carnegie with. And that was actually where I started directing. That was called the Production Company. And that's actually where we did Blues in the Night, which eventually moved to Broadway and was done all over the country, and was one of the first shows that I did at the Old Globe when I was there.
That's right. That's right. I know, Jacole, I know you and Sheldon have crossed paths along the way. Why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Sheldon, when you first took the position, the artistic director position at Pasadena Playhouse, I was an agent in Los Angeles theater.
Right.
It was KSR when I was there. It's now KMR, Kazarian Measures Ruskin. And I remember very well when you took over that position, because suddenly it was sort of known as the Black Theater. You had the play. I mean, that worked out for me because as an agent, I represented most of the Black actors in town. So, that worked out great for me. But it was kind of known in LA theater that actors of color could get hired at the Kirk Douglas, the Theater of Center Theater Group that's, in Century City. It's not,
right.
We won't talk about that. But the Kirk Douglas and the Pasadena Playhouse is where it was sort of known that actors of color would be able to get work. So my question for you is like, what is your response to that? Was it intentional? Did you purposely go in and create this space for artists of color? Did you mean to turn it into the Black theater in LA?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And obviously a meaningful question for me. It's interesting that a theater could hire one Black person, which I was at the time, and suddenly people become either under the impression or afraid, as they were, that it's going to be a Black theater, and in fact that was spoken by some, he's just going to turn it into Negro Ensemble Company West, The truth is that I had been working at the theater during the whole time I was at the Old Globe. I would come up here and do one show a year. And it was true that when I would walk through the courtyard of the theater and watch the audience, I would frequently be the only person under 60 and the only person of any color going into the theater. So when I took the job as artistic director, I certainly intended to change that for many reasons, which we could talk about. I wanted the theater to be a reflection of the Los Angeles community, of Pasadena, certainly, but also of the greater LA community. And even though the theater seemed to be segregated from the rest of the community, Pasadena was very diverse. And I would go to a restaurant in Old Town and it would be very diverse. And obviously greater LA was. But the theater was drawing from this very small audience base of Pasadena, South Pasadena, and Altadena, a little, this predominantly white audience. And for a number of reasons, aesthetically, theatrically, and even economically, I said, well, this has got to change. And it's going to change through the programming, doing more diverse work. I used to say that the theater at the time was doing one kind of play Not the same play, but one kind of play. And it was a play where you'd have 5 or 6 white people on one interior set who thought they were funny. And sometimes they were, but often they were not. But that was sort of the menu of the theater over and over again, that kind of play. There was no representation of writers of color, of actors of color for the most part, and very few people in the audience of color. So due to my own artistic appetites, but also because I felt strongly, and it certainly proved to be true very, very quickly, that we could build a larger audience by attracting a more diverse audience. And as you all know, that is largely a product of what you put on your stage, but it's also really a marketing effort. It's not that situation of if you build it, they will come. Mm-hmm. You got to build it and let people know that it's there and that you sincerely want to welcome them into your home. Because in fact, people of color had not been welcomed into Pasadena Playhouse for many years. So it was never my intention to turn it into a Black theater or Negro Ensemble Company West. But it certainly was my intention to make it a far more diverse, culturally diverse, aesthetically, artistically diverse theater than it was at the time. And that's the thing I'm proudest of in my 20 years, is we really did accomplish that and became something of a model for what I believe American theater should be and what they're struggling now to be.
Yeah. The 2 questions that I have following are both about how people went along with your journey, both the audience and the community. But I want to start with the audience, because again, from the agent perspective, prior to your tenure, one of the most memorable performances from an agent standpoint was a production of Camelot. My KSR at the time had, I want to say, 9 actors in that show. To my recollection, none of them were people of color. I think the person of color in that production that ended up touring was Lou Diamond Phillips. But it started, I believe it started on that stage. I might be wrong. Maybe I might be getting all the things mixed up. It was a long time ago. But the production that one of the first of your tenure that I remember was a production of Mice and Men. And it was
with Latino actors.
With Latino actors. It was all people of color. Was it all Latino, or were there a couple of black folks in there as well?
It was a mixed cast.
That's what I thought.
Surely the guy who owns the farm and his wife were white actors. But
yes.
But all of the people working on the farm were Latino, yes.
And I remember thinking of that as almost a transition production, where it's something you're familiar with. It's Steinbeck. We all know this. We can trust it.
Right.
But I also remember people losing their minds a little bit to see this production that was so familiar, but with very unfamiliar faces.
Right.
So, yeah, can you talk a little bit about the journey that your audience went on with you to get to this point?
Well, it started, actually, people think I make this up, but this is true. There was a very sort of radical leftist weekly newspaper, I think it was called the City Paper, similar to the LA Weekly paper, but even more leftist and radical than that. And they actually wrote an article about my being hired and how this was never going to work. I was going to be, somebody had lost their mind to hire this Black man in Pasadena to run this theater. And it was illustrated actually by me being boiled in a pot of oil with rich Pasadena white people dancing around the cauldron. That's true.
Wait, what year was this?
you would think it was 18 something, yeah. Right? But this is 1997.
Oh.
So that's what it started with the expectation that, either they were going to get rid of me or that the audience was just going to desert the theater. And there was fear of that. That was a genuine fear. And in fact, when I boldly, or from my point of view, not so boldly, but aggressively, started to program the theater in a more diverse way, there were some fidgets, complaining, and some exits. We lost some people. And when I was confronted with that in marketing meetings or board meetings or whatever, I would say, we're going to have to be content to let those people go, or you're going to have to be content to let me go, because that is not going to change. As long as I am here, we are going down that path. Now, fortunately, very quickly, some of those productions became the best-selling productions in box office history at the theater. So I always say, it's very hard for a board, a staff, or anybody to argue with tremendous box office success and artistic success as well. But we did lose people. Fortunately, the number of people that we lost was far, far, far made up for in new subscribers and new audience members. My favorite story about it is the managing director at the time got a letter saying, from a subscriber saying, I'm canceling my subscription because this Epps guy, he's crazy and he's doing too much black work, too much. I don't want to see it. Of course, he didn't send the letter to me. He sent it to my white managing director, but he passed it on to me, and I said, well, I'm going to call him. I called the guy and I said, this is Sheldon Epps. Long pregnant pause. And I said, I hear you feel we're doing too much black work now. And he said, yeah, that's true. I think so, and I don't like it, so I'm canceling my subscription. And I said to him very directly, I said, well, we have announced that next season, out of 6 productions, 2 of them are going to have actors of color. And if that is too much for you, if 2 out of 6 is more than you're willing to see, you should leave. And he kind of groused and, well, I'll think about it. And he hung up. About 6 years later, a man came up to me in the courtyard and said, you're Sheldon, aren't you? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, I'm the guy who called you about canceling my subscription. And I'm so glad that I did not, because I've had some of the best theater experiences here over the last 5 or 6 years that I've ever had. So, that makes it well worth it. Right. that one story, and I think that one story is many people's story. Otherwise, we would have lost many more subscribers. But in fact, we went in the other direction. So, it takes a certain amount of, as everything we do in the theater, it takes bravery and conviction and willingness to risk. There is no greatness without risk. So that's what it took, but it worked out well.
That's right.
And would you say the community came along with you? It's funny because I used to teach in that community. I taught at Blair High School that was within blocks of the Pasadena Playhouse. My students were from South Pasadena and Altadena. So I know the community that you're wanting to reflect. Did they come?
Yeah. To be quite honest, not everybody. 20 years later, when I was making my exit, there were people who said, oh, thank God, we get our theater back now. So, and as I said, we did lose some subscribers, we lost some donors, but the vast majority came along on the ride, the vast majority. And more than that, we built a new audience, at a time when the theater most American theaters were struggling to hold on to a dying audience, an audience of subscribers which was leaving because of age. We were attracting a new audience. But I do not deny that there were some people who never ever got on board with what was going on. And many years later, very specifically, I remember at a board meeting, when we were being celebrated for our efforts in diversity, when we were getting major grants from some of those foundations that support all of these theaters for our distinction in that area. Somebody at a board meeting actually said, I like our diversity, but do we have to make so much noise about it? Do we have to talk about it so much? And I said, as long as I'm here, we have to, and we will, So you cannot win everybody over, because whatever is going on in their life is their baggage. And there are minds that cannot be changed. But as Toni Morrison said, at some point you have to let racism be the racist problem.
Right.
And say, I'm going over here and do what I do. In her case, I'm going over here and write. You take your racism over there and do whatever you want to do with it. But that's your problem, not mine.
Right. How much of that is still prevalent today? Like, how much of that attitude and that fear, how much of that is still prevalent today as we look at now that, as I always say, we're in, especially now in this space we're in right now. And, like I said, all the statements have been made and everybody's rushing with action plans and this and that and this and that, but how much of it is still going to be a problem of being able to, once you go to put these action plans in order? 'Cause I mean, we got pushed back just by releasing the Black Lives Matter statement. Some of the response we got was just like, are you kidding me? Come on. And, I think as theater gets ready to open back up, I think people are going to have to realize that it's just not going to be like, the doors are just not going to open. Like, there's still going to be this pushback. And I guess what I'm saying by asking how prevalent that is today, what is the courage that artistic directors and development directors, and leadership is going to have to be able to face the fact that you might have some of them donors that'll be like, you know what, you're about to do too much Black stuff. I get it, I understand it, but I don't want to hear all this all the time.
I'm out. Yeah. Yeah, no, those are words that I can quote from 1997, 98, my first few years at the theater. I don't think that's completely changed. I think the theaters have to be prepared for that. I think that those at the top of our government are creating a kind of societal fear about suburbs being taken over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your neighborhood's going to be taken over. Some people will hear that as, if Freedom gets hired as associate artistic director, your theater's going to be taken over. You need to be afraid of that. So the theaters have to be prepared to deal with that, because it's still a very strong reality. But you have to believe, and I believe, and I certainly believe it based on experience, that it's not the predominant point of view. Is an existing point of view? Absolutely. But it's not the predominant point of view, And as I said, you got to be brave enough to let some people go.
Yeah.
You can't cure everybody. The theater is a curative. We are successful much of the time, but we're not going to be successful all of the time.
Right.
There's some whose ailments are so strong that we can't do it, but somebody will come along to replace them.
Right.
Sheldon, can you talk a little bit about that bravery? Because again, right now we in the American theater, the other thing that we're doing is calling out bad behavior. And a lot of the bad behaviors in this theater are some of our biggest funders, are our donors, are our supporters. And there is the fear. It's one thing to call out a subscriber or to say, to call on the phone and say, if this is too much for you, then thank you very much. Maybe you should go. How do you say that? How do you find the bravery to say that to people who are maybe funding your shows or are putting in large enough donations that there is a greater fear?
Yes. And there is, and I've heard artistic directors and managing directors talk about that recently at some of the meetings. And the response that I gave to them is one that I will offer now is number one thing is American theater has to realize that there are a lot of very well-to-do people of color in America now. We ain't all struggling. Thank you very much. I'm concerned, but some of us have a few shekels to put together. But there's some people who have a lot, and will reward the bravery and the intentionality that we're talking about. Just as with the marketing effort, that's an outreach effort. People of color don't have a big history of being art supporters. So you will have to take the greater effort of going to those people who come to your theater and like those diversity efforts and say to them, if you like this, I need your help to support this kind of work. I need your financial help to continue this effort. And I believe that there are people of all colors who are responsive to that, But American theaters do have to realize that some of those people are the people that they want to be sitting in the seats of the theater.
Right.
Many of those people can also be donors. We run some major corporations now, and there are corporate dollars that are out there to support the brave work of an arts organization. So it's got to be a shift in that mentality as well. And again, that happened at the Playhouse. That a major portion of our donated revenue started to come from donors of color.
Did you see a shift on your board as well? Oh, so sorry, Ahmed.
No, go ahead. No, go for it.
Did you see a shift on your board as well?
A little, not as much, honestly, as I think there should have been, but it was certainly no longer an all white board. Yeah. That for sure. But I understand the fear, but as I said before, isn't everything that we do in the theater a little bit scary? And don't you have to be brave about all of it? So, conviction is a word you say in rehearsal all the time. And as a theater, you have to have the courage of your convictions, or don't do it.
Yeah.
If you're not really going to have the courage of the convictions, don't do it. Let your theater be what it is, and we'll go some other places.
Right.
But and don't dabble in it. Don't try it for a season and say, well, we tried and it didn't work.
Didn't work.
And so much of that is, as we talk about representation as it should be, we talk about so much about what we see on stage. But, for me as myself, my career in theater has come from working backstage and working as an administrator. And so, as far as representation, yeah, we see the actors and the dancers and the singers, but also, the people who work in the office, the people who, when you come into the theater, the ushers, the house managers, the people you see in the box office. Me and Freedom were talking about, we were talking about internships, and we were talking about how that that disadvantages not just Black people, but people who have financial problems, because there are people who are interested in the theater. They want to come and be involved in this, but they don't have the opportunity to do a free internship, because if they're going to take that time, they need that time to make money,
Right.
so they might want to volunteer to theater, but you know what? They got to go work at Vons. They got to go bag those groceries because they need the money for that time. And I was watching an interview you did with our colleague Michael Taylor of the Theater Corner. And in fact, your episode of Theater Corner will be on PBS starting on Saturday.
Oh, really?
But I was watching that interview where you were, as we're talking about the pipeline and how we're seen in theater and who's in leadership and who are in these places. And, you were discussing the leadership pipeline, and the question came up, and it's a question that's come up, in all these discussions, like, how much of this are we seeing in our colleagues and in these theaters of, how much of it is it intentional or non-intentional? And you had this great term of passive segregation or passive door slamming. Can you kind of expound on that a little bit so people can kind of understand what that looks like, or kind of get what that, maybe they're seeing that or doing that?
Yeah. Let me answer it in two parts. First of all, I think that there's a lot of activity going on now. I know this is true of Black Theater United and Black Theater Coalition, of trying to actually raise funds to subsidize people in roles other than performing roles. People who can be development directors, people who can be marketing directors, because you're right. In many cases, for a long time, to have a fellowship or an internship, you had to have parents who who could subsidize you. So I know there's activity in that direction now. The Directors Union, for example, has just started a new fellowship, a well-funded fellowship that's all about getting people prepared for artistic leadership, and providing a kind of stipend that allows people to go to a theater in a position as an artistic associate or something, but the theater won't pay for it. SDC will provide it. So I think there'll be more and more of those kind of opportunities emerging. But also, in terms of the other question you asked, I think in terms of racism in the theater in general, which has kind of been a hush-hush subject until recently, because supposedly the American theater was so highly evolved. I think what I was talking about with Michael is it's not so much as a director, as a potential managing director, it's not so much that theaters have looked at you and seen you and rejected you. It's that they never thought of you in the first place. For a long time, until right now, when theaters were doing their searches for artistic directors, managing directors, senior leadership positions, and or hiring directors for other than what we would call the February slot, the one Black production in February.
Right.
It's not that they looked at you for the Chekhov play or the Shakespeare play or the Noel Coward play. They didn't look at you and reject you. They just never thought about you. It was never even considered, Jacole, that you could go to such and such a theater and direct a Shakespeare play or a Tom Stoppard play. So that's what I meant by, the covert, passive racism that has existed in the American theater that hopefully is changing now.
I saw that exact thing a lot as an agent, both in how the breakdowns were presented and how folks submitted. The default is white. When I was an assistant, I would see the submissions come through, and if it didn't specify seeking a person of color, then the submissions would be all white. And then when it said open ethnicity, that's where the Black people would get submitted, because it's like, oh, they're, but and I don't think that the agent was doing that on purpose. It's exactly what you're saying. It just didn't occur to him that could be any other way. And I would say, as a casting director, that was something that was very important to put on the breakdowns, is any ethnicity for any role, and just opening minds. And I don't know. And it comes down to the pipeline issue, because this is something that we go through with designers. This is something that we go through with directors. This is it's with playwrights, it's all the way down. And so how do we, as the theater makers, how do we shift that narrative? How do we, and I guess that's what we're in the middle of right now. That's what all of these conversations are.
Right. I think we shifted by doing what we're doing right now, which is to talk about it. But I think we also, some of that has to be placed on the artist. The artists also have to make it known. If you're interested in doing Shakespeare as a designer, you got to let that be known. you have to say that, and actors have to show up and declare themselves for those opportunities. Honestly, there were many times when we would, even with our history of casting and all of that, many times when we were hoping to cast a play in a more diverse way, looking to do that. Of course, we would do it through agencies' submissions, but at the open call, no actors of color would show up. I think at the time is largely because perhaps they didn't believe that you were serious about it. But I think now that the theaters are declaring we are serious about it, it also falls on the artist to say, I'm interested in this and I'm capable of doing it. I have the skill set to do this as well. Don't put me in that black box in February and, only hire me for the plays during Black History Month.
Well, and you do hear a lot of artists say, I stopped, exactly the point that you just made. I stopped showing up because when I did, I wasn't hired. I stopped showing up because I never saw myself reflected on that stage. Obviously, that's not the case for Pasadena Playhouse.
Right.
But what do you say to those actors who speak that very authentically?
Yeah, I say I understand you're feeling that way, but nothing that we've won as people of color has been won because we stopped showing up. Because we stopped trying to cross a bridge. We didn't get across the first time, we tried again, and we tried again. Sooner or later, we got across the bridge. So what I say is, I faced it, in my career as a director, you just have to keep knocking on the door. You also have to be prepared, and have the skill level to do the work. But if you do, make yourself unavoidable, I sometimes say. Make yourself be seen. Don't give up.
That's right. I want to remind everybody that we will have a question and answer period in just a little bit. And I see there's a couple of questions already in the room. So if you have a question, whether you're on Facebook or on Zoom, just submit your question in the chat. One thing I want to talk to you, Sheldon, also is about, as we're looking at everything going on, I want to talk about what happens in the boardroom. And, a lot of people are making decisions right now and trying to figure out their action plans. But I know there are a lot of boards out there trying to figure it out, but they are not diverse within themselves to figure it out. How important is that, and how important is it for organizations? how important is it that they're going to have to take a look at themselves and be like, hey, if we want to, if we're really about rising to this moment, if we're really about living up to this mission statement, if we're really about living up to this statement that we put out, and I mean everybody, I'm talking about from the NBA to Amazon to theater to everybody, you know,
Right.
if we're really about living up to this statement, how important is it going to be for some of these boards, like you said earlier, that to look at themselves, that don't have one person of color, you know, or even in themselves don't really have an association every day, like an everyday of association with people of color. How important is it going to be for those boards to look at themselves and be like, hey, like some of us might have to step off, or we're going to have to shake some things up, or we're going to have to do some things here to really deeply change if we want the theater to continue.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's vitally important. I mean, we are seeing, and it's healthy, you know, we are seeing a response to the movement and the demands and the voices being raised in the hiring practices, for example, with artistic directors. And almost every day you see a person of color hired as an artistic advisor, an artistic associate, an associate artistic director. And that's a good and important step. But the next step is that boards are going to, the theaters are going to have to examine their boards and make sure that it is a board that is supportive of the efforts the theater is making. You know, again, it's that word community. It takes a village. Well, the whole village has to be behind these efforts and supportive. And again, you can't just be the artistic director and the directors who's courageous, the executive director. It has to be the board. You know, because there may be some gaps in there. You know, you may lose that donor that we were talking about. So the board has to be prepared for that, and they have to equally believe and be convicted to the mission, so it doesn't frighten them off, you know, and in fact makes them as angry as it made me, you know, and makes them as aggressive about going out and finding the resources to support the total vision of the theater. Yeah. So yes, I think that's a big step that theaters are going to have to take next. You know, make sure that the boards and frankly the staff at your theater is on board with this new mission, if it is a new mission for your theater.
Right.
Because you hear those, you know, I've heard those whispers, you know, not just from board members, from staff members.
You know. Yeah.
Absolutely. Just because you work in the theater doesn't make you liberal.
That's correct.
Oh yeah, that's a big fallacy right there. You know, as we, you know, I usually round out the conversation at this moment, and but with, you know, now that we are here at this moment and we're moving forward, and you know, we've had everybody, you know, who's been paying attention to these conversations. We've had everybody on these conversations, from theater goers to volunteers to staff members to, you know, upper level administrators to act, like everybody is taking part in this conversation. I wanted to kind of get into the kind of synopsis with the quote that you have from the DC Metro article that you said, "I'm especially happy to be of service at a time when all American theaters are exploring ways to transform today's challenges into creative opportunities for the future. I look forward to being an integral part of that valuable process." Sam Woodhouse, who it was his, you know, vision to put these conversations forward online. You know, it's always my question at the end, but he really wanted me to emphatically ask it, and your quote sets it up. What needs to happen? Where do we go from here? And like you said, that's not just the administrators, not just the boards, but the artists, the staff members, you know, the people of color, the people who are not of color. where do we go from here so that moving from this flashpoint forward, and it's got a lot of challenges going, but where do we go from here so that this just doesn't turn into another moment where everybody said a lot of stuff and got excited, but then everything just went flat when the world returned to normal?
Yeah. Well, I think what I meant by that quote, and the answer to your question is this is a moment. It's undeniable that this is a moment, a time of great challenge for American theaters, all American theaters. I meant that we have to take these incredible challenges and think of them as opportunities rather than just challenges. And the primary opportunity, I believe, is to not try to get back to where we were, but to get to where we should be
Right.
in all ways. Not just return to what was the norm of several months ago or years before that, but dream about what our theaters can be as we are beginning again. American theater, for the most part, has been run on the models that were created in the middle of the last century, by Zelda Fichandler and Nina Vance and Gordon Davidson. Great visionaries, but that's what we have to remember. They were visionaries because they didn't have any models that they were following. They were dreamers about what the theater could be. So I think we have to take this opportunity and be dreamers again and be creative, not just be sustainers of what American theater has been, but be creators of what American theater can be, in every way, from where we do the work to who's in it, to who's creating it, to what time of year we do it, what kind of calendar we observe. All of those things, we have the opportunity to say, is there a better way to do it than we have been? Because we're starting from scratch. So let's build it in a better way, not just rebuild it as it was.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. We do have a few questions. Why don't we go ahead and move into those? I have one question, and the question is to you, Sheldon. Have you found that, and you touched a little bit on it earlier, but have you found that the traditional financial contribution to joining a board is a barrier to having more people of color on the board?
Yes, the give or get can be a barrier, but again, this is something that I would remind theaters of. I don't think that the most effective fundraisers on a board are necessarily the people who can write the biggest checks. I've found that it is better to have an aggressive fundraiser on your board than it is to have somebody on your board who will just write the check for the minimum give or get.
Yes. Yes.
And some of those people who are enthusiastic and brave and dynamic about asking can be much more effective sometimes than the person who says, okay, what's my minimum gift this year? Here's my check for it. So it's important to, as you collaborate with new board members, examine that possibility, as well as, do they have the X amount of dollars that the give or get requires?
So the board got to have workers on it.
Yeah.
Well, and it comes down also to, even as you said, there are Black folks with money. There are people of color with money, but people aren't, especially people of color, we're not quick to part with our money unless it's something that we see as an investment or as giving back or as commute or whatever. And if we're not, it's same with the actors. If we're going to stop showing up if we're not welcome there. As I'm not pointing to myself as an affluent person of color by any means, but as an affluent person of color, I'm not going to part with my dollars to an organization that hasn't proven to me that I am as valuable as my money.
Right.
And so I think that it all goes so hand in hand.
Right. I'd rather have on the board, say your give or get is $5,000. I'd rather have a passionate storyteller about my theater on the board who can raise $25,000 than
Yeah.
than somebody who only is willing to write the check for the $5,000.
Right.
And of course, obviously, economically, that makes sense as well. So again, think about it in a new way. You know, this person that you're looking at, you know, was so enthusiastic about your theater, may not be able to personally meet that give, but they might do a whole lot better than that.
That's right. Another question, and it's something you touched on a little bit about vision. And this one is a little bit, it says that, you know, the focus has always been, seems to be on diversity of casting. But what about, can you speak a little bit on diversity in vision? Diversity in the vision of what the theater does or what the theater is going to put on stage? Or at what point does the theater look at something and take a chance on somebody else's vision and doesn't get in the way of what they're going to do and come in and put on the stage?
Well, you know, I think that because theaters are so economically challenged, we're always all struggling to get the resources to stay open, you know, to do the work. And I'll confess to this. The challenge of that can shut down your imagination and your artistic courage, you know. You got to remind yourself that but for the public theater, which took a big chance, there would be no Hamilton. I can tell you, if Lin-Manuel Miranda had probably walked into my office and said, "I'm going to do this with all these black actors playing Washington, and it's going to be in hip hop," I would have said, "Nice to meet you." Or maybe not, but you know, it was again the bravery and the courage of that artistic vision, and I'm sure that there was a point when Oscar Eustis probably didn't really know what Lin-Manuel exactly meant, but recognized his passion and the gift that he had already displayed, and said, "Okay, I'll take a chance on that." You know, so again, it's bravery and courage as opposed to playing it safe.
Right, right. Another question we have, which is definitely, I mean, it's definitely for the time we're in now, but it's always has been, always will be. What is the thought process as far as, like, for you as an artistic director? What is the thought process as far as putting things on stage or programs that support whatever current social movement is happening at the time?
Oh, I think it's very important. I mentioned before the production of 12 Angry Men that I did first here and then at Ford's Theater. It was prompted by the Trayvon Martin case, and in my feeling that here was something that was in the headlines every day that my audience, the audience at the theater, needed to grapple with. They needed to grapple at that point with the fact that because Obama was president, it did not mean that racism and racial tension in this country had disappeared. So it was important when you put that in front of the audience and stimulate that conversation. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary again, but 4 years later, when Ford's called me and asked me to do it, I realized it was equally necessary.
Right.
So, Yeah, there was a time in the American theater when it was constantly reflecting what was in the headlines of the newspaper, and we need more of that. We need
Right.
more of that, and it's exciting, I think, when theater does that, and not always provides answers, but stimulates the questions.
And that's going to go back again to that. With that, that's going to go back again to having at times that bravery to be
Yes.
able to talk about something that's happening in the news. Because some people are going to be, oh God, here we go again. I don't want, but stuff has to be talked about. It has to be explored. It has to be explored on stage. And
Yeah.
I think part of that too is going to, like you said, is like I think theater is going to realize, like, hey, you might realize there's an audience out there that you didn't know would come to sit in your seat.
Very true.
Maybe they
I,
have money that they'll spend to come sit in and walk into your lobby.
someone said to me, I made it a rule to stand out in the lobby of the theater after a show as often as I could and make myself available for comments, good or bad, to be brave enough to take it.
Now that's some bravery right there. That's direct access. That is brave.
But someone walked up to me after some challenging production and said, I don't really come to the theater to have to think. And all I could say was, well, I'm glad that there are many people who do come to the theater because they want to think, they want to be challenged. Not all the time, not every show, but they're willing to take that important ride as well, because I believe that is part of what this art form is there to do, to stimulate thinking and conversation.
Right. This kind of goes along with this comment, but it's really in particular to our current moment. The question is, do you think what is happening right now with the Black Lives Matter movement will have, a noticeable shift in theater audiences going forward?
I hope so. I do hope so. Again, all that we do in theater is about faith and hope. I believe, I think there are tangible reasons to believe that things are going to be different this time. When the conversations began after George Floyd's tragedy, people would call me and I honestly would say, I'm really tired of talking about this, because I've been having this conversation for 30 years, since before I went to the old globe, But again, as I said before, I had to find my energy to have it again. But the conversations seem more focused on action and change in ways that I believe are going to be positive and long lasting, much more now than ever before. And that's a great thing.
That's right. That's right. I guess as we get ready, to close things out, Jacole, do you have any final thoughts or questions for Sheldon? Anything that we've touched upon that you want to expound on some more?
I just want to thank you. I feel like I've sat in a master class in so many things over the last 45 minutes. So I'm just honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ahmed has that effect on people.
He does.
I'm just trying to microphone and ask questions. As we do get ready to wrap things up, Sheldon, I do like to ask everybody, as a parting shot, to all the people who are listening now, the people who will watch this in replay, what would you like to, what is on your mind? What would you like to tell our audience? Like I said, it's full of theater goers, volunteers, administrators, donors, board members that are watching right now and will watch. What are your words to everybody as we go away, as we do move? Because it just seems like every time it seems like things are calming down. you wake up the next morning or you get home from work the next day and something else is blown up. And we're still trying to move forward. And it's not just a racial thing. We're dealing with this pandemic. We're dealing with, I had another friend in radio who got laid off today. Like, it's another industry decimated. Theater right now, live events, just the pain in it. But as we're trying to have this courage and we're finding this way to keep theater alive and we're going forward, what message do you have for everybody who's listening from you, just going forward, and what they need to do or how they can contribute to keep this performing arts world and this theater world going in a positive fashion, in an optimistic fashion, in a working towards something fashion?
Well, the first thing I would say is, particularly to audience members, but also to artists, is we should be grateful for and to each other, because we all know that what we do is difficult, it's challenging, but it's also rewarding and fulfilling and important, and that's why it has survived for thousands of years. So I am grateful to anybody who participates in any way in working in the theater. We will survive. And I say this as somebody who's survived a long, long life in the theater, who survived a theater being closed for a long time for financial reasons, but
Yes.
came back strongly, stronger than ever. What we do is too important to let it go. And wonderful as this Zoom format is, it's not the joy of creating live theater and being there together. And we need that. So everybody just hold on, as we've had to about many other things, hold on until we can have it again. And we are going to.
That's right. That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody, Sheldon Epps. Sheldon, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And again, congratulations on the new post at the Forest Theater. We appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. Jacole, thank you for co-hosting with me tonight. And everybody who's watching, please visit sdrep.org. Visit the La Jolla Playhouse at lajollaplayhouse.org. Visit the Old Globe at theoldglobe.org. Check out all of the wonderful, adventurous things we are trying to put together online right now for theater, and then planning for when we can all be back in a theater in seats, hopefully sooner than later.
Amen.
Thank all of you for joining. And again, sign up for our next event if you need to get on the email list. So just send me an email at adents@sdrep.org. And again, thank you, everybody. And Sheldon, thank you very much. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thanks.
All right. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.